Rich man locked autistic girl in basement, but a stray dog heard her crying. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Charles Harrington was a respectable man, successful, a generous widower who had retired to live quietly after years of working abroad. No one suspected what was happening behind those walls. Deep inside the house, where sunlight never reached and the sound of birds couldn't be heard, an 8-year-old girl sat on a cold concrete floor. The porch creaked above, but it no longer scared Emma. She had learned to count Charles's footsteps. She knew when it was him and when it was just the wind. Her arms wrapped around a dirty teddy bear, one ear drooping, its stuffing spilling out through a torn seam. Emma was different. From the moment she was born, her mother noticed she didn't respond like other children. She didn't speak, avoided eye contact, and covered her ears when voices grew loud. But she also had an incredible memory, a unique sensitivity, and a way of understanding the world that many struggled to grasp. Her mother called her "my silent angel," but her mother was gone. She had died in a household accident just months earlier, and Charles, the cleaning service employer where her mother worked, offered to take Emma in while social services figured things out. What he never said was that he had no intention of letting her go. Emma had no one else, and he didn't want his reputation tarnished by rumors or talk of a troubled child in his home. So he locked her in the basement. No windows, a dim light that barely worked. He brought food once a day and avoided looking at her. Not a word, not a gesture of kindness. As if she were a mistake he wanted to forget. Emma didn't cry. She didn't scream. At first she had, but she soon learned that in that place, noise changed nothing. She began to notice small shifts in her surroundings, the dampness that grew at night, the smell of detergent seeping through cracks when laundry was done upstairs. She traced invisible patterns on the floor with her fingers, as if drawing stories only she could see. Outside, the world kept turning. Spring was nearing. Neighbors walked their dogs along leaf-strewn sidewalks. But inside the Harrington estate, time stood still for Emma. A broken clock on the wall always showed 3:15, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. That night, Charles came down to the basement as usual. He carried a tray with cold rice and a piece of stale bread. He said nothing. He left the plate in a corner and walked away. Emma watched from the shadows. She was scared to approach while he was there. When she heard the bolt lock upstairs, she stood slowly. She walked barefoot, leaving faint footprints on the dusty floor. She ate in silence. Later, she curled up in her corner, the teddy bear in her arms. She closed her eyes. There was nothing to hope for. No tomorrow, no light, no words. Just this moment and the next, all the same. But something far away was about to change everything. Miles away on the outskirts of a small town called Willow Creek, a furry figure moved through the alleys with a steady but weary step. It was a medium-sized dog, with amber fur and dark patches on its back, one ear drooping as if it had been mistreated long ago. A deep scar marked its right front leg, and its eyes held a story deeper than words could tell. No one knew its real name, but in the town, everyone called it Scout. Scout didn't belong to anyone, but he wasn't a stranger either. Some shopkeepers left him water, others scraps of food. Kids watched him with a mix of awe and respect. He was different from other strays. He didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't bark out of desperation. He observed, always alert, as if waiting for a sign. What most didn't know was that Scout had been a police dog in his younger days. Trained to track missing people and sense human emotions in crises, he had worked alongside an officer named David Peterson, who called him his most loyal partner. But during a rescue mission in a wooded area, Scout fell into a trap that permanently injured his leg. He was retired and sent to a shelter where no one wanted him. Eventually, he escaped. Since then, he wandered free, but without direction. That morning, something shifted. Scout woke with a start under the old bridge where he slept. No new noise, no strange smell, but something stirred inside him, like an electric current running through his body. He stood, sniffed the air. Nothing, just dampness and wet earth. But his instincts, the ones that had never failed him, told him to move, and so he did. He walked without looking back, crossing streets, roadside edges, open fields. He wasn't searching for food or shelter. He followed something he couldn't explain, like an invisible compass guided by someone else's pain. His injured legs didn't stop him. His breathing was heavy but steady. He walked for hours until the forest grew thick. In the distance, a large estate rose on a hill, its grey shingles and high walls looming. Scout stopped. He'd never been there before, but something about the place unsettled him. The air felt heavy, the forest sounds faded near the property. He approached cautiously, silent. He circled the perimeter, sniffing, until he reached an iron gate surrounding the grounds. That's when he felt it. A sound so faint no human could have caught it. A vibration in the ground, a muffled whimper. It was like a stifled cry, not heard with ears, but felt in the soul. Scout tensed. He planted his paws in the dirt and raised his head. His ears twitched, searching for the exact direction. He moved closer to the gate, digging a little to slip underneath. The smell of confinement hit him. Dampness, rusted metal, layered sadness. He walked slowly, nose brushing the ground. He reached a corner where a small vent grate hid behind some bushes. He sat. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just waited. Inside, on the other side of the grate, Emma was curled up, as always. But that night, she couldn't sleep. The basement's silence felt different. She crawled slowly across the floor to the wall. Then she felt it. A breath. Warmth. Presence. She froze. Her fingers touched the grate. On the other side, a wet, trembling nose drew near. Emma didn't know what it was, but her heart beat faster. It wasn't fear, it was something new, hope. From the main road, the Harrington estate looked like a perfect postcard. Neat gardens, a polished stone driveway, classic columns, and a flag waving gently in the breeze. Every detail screamed success, tradition, and respect. But step past that front, and the air shifted, as if something darker lurked within those spotless walls. Charles was the kind of man who owned every room he entered. Tall with slicked back hair and a neatly trimmed beard, he wore tailored suits even when no one was around. His voice was firm, polite on the surface, but carried a cold edge that few dared to challenge. In Willow Creek, everyone knew him as the philanthropist who donated to the local church, funded the children's hospital renovation, and spoke to kids at schools about hard work and grit. When the tragedy of his former housekeeper, a single mother who died leaving her daughter alone, hit the news, Charles was the first to step up and help. He did it publicly, in front of cameras, with tears in his eyes. He said the world needed more kindness. No one guessed his kindness was all an act. The truth was Charles never wanted Emma in his life. He only agreed to take her in because a social worker threatened to go to the press if he didn't volunteer. At first he thought about sending her to some quiet facility, but then decided it was better to hide her in a more elegant way, and so he did. The basement was fitted with a reinforced door and internal locks. No modern ventilation, no windows, no distractions. Just an old mattress, a blanket, and a flickering light. The security cameras didn't cover that part of the house. Even the staff didn't know it existed. Charles went down once a day, silently, with food on a plastic tray. He never looked her in the eye, never said her name. To him, Emma wasn't a person. She was a problem, a rock in his path he had to keep hidden until time and forgetfulness did their work. That night, Charles was on edge. In his study, he reviewed reports about expanding his investments in Europe. A call from his lawyer had rattled him. The social worker who'd followed Emma's case was asking questions again. Annoyed, he slammed his laptop shut. He thought about calling someone, maybe finding a contact to handle the issue permanently, but he decided to wait. A scandal was the last thing he needed. He opened the window and poured himself a drink. From there, he caught a quick movement in the bushes near the north wall. Something small, maybe a raccoon. He grabbed a flashlight and headed out with quick steps. In the garden, the silence was total, but something made his skin crawl. Then he heard it, a low growl. Not threatening, but a warning. He turned and saw a dog standing in front of him, body tense, eyes locked on his. Scout. It took Charles a second to recognize it as one of those strays that roamed Willow Creek. "Get out of here," he snapped, waving the flashlight at the dog. Scout didn't move, he didn't bark, he just stared. 1 second, 2. Then he turned his head toward the house. Charles felt a chill, as if the dog knew, as if it was pointing. He walked back, uneasy. He couldn't allow visitors, especially not nosy creatures sniffing where they didn't belong. He'd take care of it. He'd call animal control tomorrow, and if needed, he'd hire someone to deal with the dog for good. As he climbed the stairs, he didn't notice Emma standing by the vent grate in the basement. She didn't fully understand what was outside, but something in her stirred. A spark, a whisper that someone was there. She wasn't alone. Dawn arrived without fanfare. Heavy clouds hung low over the rooftops of Willow Creek, carrying the damp scent of earth and wet leaves, as if something old and forgotten was stirring. Scout was still there, near the estate's wall, lying among the bushes, his eyes open and alert, waiting for a sign he didn't fully understand. He'd spent the whole night watching, not moving, not barking, just listening. The wind carried faint sounds, but one persisted, almost imperceptible. A shaky murmur, an uneven rhythm of breathing from inside the house. Scout couldn't explain it, but he felt it with an intensity that kept him rooted. By mid-morning, Charles left in his sleek car for a meeting. The engine roared as it sped off, kicking up dust at the entrance. It was Scout's chance. He stood with effort, his injured leg still aching, but it didn't stop him. He moved carefully along the edge of the house, sniffing until he reached the small vent grate again. Inside, Emma was awake. Her eyes were puffy from sleep, but her body was alert. Something had changed since the night before. She didn't know what that sound was. A low rumble, maybe, or a breath that wasn't hers, but it didn't scare her. It felt warm, alive. She crawled to the grate, silent. She pressed her cheek to the cold floor, listening harder. Scout was there. She knew it before she saw him. A wet nose peeked through the slats. Their eyes met for the first time. His, full of determination. Hers, wider than ever. No words, no touches, just a shared silence that needed no translation. Scout lay down in front of the grate. He settled in as if he'd stay forever. Emma reached out a small hand. She touched the metal. Her fingers shook. Scout gently licked the air. No physical contact, but the message was clear. I'm here. That was enough. Emma didn't need words. She felt the language of the soul. Minutes passed, maybe hours. As the sun began to dip, Scout stood. He walked slowly to the back of the property and vanished into the trees. Emma watched him go without fear. She knew he'd return. She didn't know how, but she knew. In town, a gray-haired woman in a wool coat stared out the window of her small flower shop. Susan Miller had been a schoolteacher for over 30 years, and now in retirement, she sold roses, lilacs, and lavender at the town square. But that morning, she couldn't focus on orders. Something was off. Scout hadn't come for his breakfast, as he had every day for months. He always showed up at the same time, with the same patient look. And today, nothing. Worried, she closed early. She walked the square, asking vendors if anyone had seen him. No one had. She decided to head to the fields. It wasn't the first time Scout had wandered off, but something in her gut told her this was different. At the edge of the wooded area around the Harrington estate, Susan paused. She knew Charles didn't allow visitors, but she also knew Scout. If he was there, it was for a reason. Meanwhile, Emma slept by the grate, the teddy bear under her arm, her heart beating differently. That night, she dreamed of footsteps in the woods, of leaves rustling, of a distant, deep sound, like a drum, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers, but made her feel alive. The next morning dawned cloudy and cold, like a warning. At the Harrington estate, silence ruled. Charles had returned late the previous night after a meeting with investors. Exhausted, he didn't bother checking the security cameras. He had no reason to suspect anything. In fact, he was pleased to have dodged more questions about Emma. The issue had gone quiet for now, and that was good news. He went upstairs, poured a strong coffee, and prepared to spend the day on more business. He felt no guilt about locking Emma away. To him, she was just a child who needed to stay out of sight. The house could run without her. He didn't need her. Meanwhile, in the garden, the sun began to break through the clouds. Scout returned. He'd spent the night near the estate, resting in a dark corner, hidden by trees. As soon as he saw movement inside the house, he approached silently, like a ghost unafraid of being seen. The dog stopped by the kitchen window, sniffing the air. The house was calm. No one seemed to notice him, his eyes fixed on the inner garden. There among the bushes, Emma was peering out a window, looking outside as if waiting for something she felt in her bones. The girl took a step toward the back door, her frail body tense, as if preparing for something she couldn't explain. She touched the cold glass of the door but stopped before opening it. She heard something, the wind maybe, or footsteps, something close, like a warning. At that moment, Charles appeared at the garden's edge. his steps firm and confident. Scout saw him coming and dropped to the ground, still hoping to go unnoticed. Charles didn't see him, but something in the air unsettled him. He looked at the bushes, then the window. Nothing. Yet the feeling lingered, as if someone was watching. Emma, in her corner, didn't grasp the tension in the air. She only knew something big was coming. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the silence. The back door slammed open. Charles had found her. She'd tried to step outside. "Emma!" he shouted, furious, seeing the girl standing, staring through the doorway. But Emma didn't react. Her face showed no fear or anger, just a deep calm. Somehow she knew her broken, shadowed life was about to change. Charles stormed toward her, but before he could reach her, a loud bark stopped him cold. Scout had leaped from his hiding spot and landed in the garden with surprising agility. The dog stared at him, body tense, ears up. Charles stepped back instinctively. Something in the dog's gaze froze him. "Get out!" he yelled, raising his hand, but Scout didn't budge. The dog stood firm, unafraid. Charles backed off further. The animal seemed to know it was protecting the girl. Scout, eyes locked on Charles, took a step forward. His body was ready for anything. His protective instincts had kicked in. He wouldn't let anyone hurt Emma. He knew somehow that this was his moment. But before Charles could react, a figure appeared from the trees. Susan. She'd followed the dog's trail and now stood in the garden, watching the scene calmly. Years as a teacher had taught her how life's pieces fit together. She knew she was seeing something important, something she couldn't ignore. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking at Charles, then Emma. Her voice was steady, determined. Charles, nervous, could barely respond. "This isn't your business, Susan. Get out," he said, his voice tight. But Susan didn't move. Her gaze was firm, challenging, and Charles, despite his power, felt something crack inside him. "I think it is my business," Susan replied calmly, stepping closer to Emma. The girl looked at her, unafraid, as if she knew someone had found her. Scout, vigilant, didn't move an inch. The danger was still there, but something had shifted. The balance was no longer in Charles's favor. Hours passed like a broken clock. Inside the estate, Charles paced his study, face tense, fingers clenched. Susan's unexpected visit had thrown him off. He'd managed to convince her everything was under control, that Emma was his sick niece needing special care. But he knew something had changed. That dog, that woman, their eyes said more than words. They were watching him. He decided he couldn't take risks anymore. He went to the attic, where he kept an old animal crate, planning to trap the dog if it showed up again. He also considered moving Emma, maybe to a remote cabin, far from town. No one would miss her, he thought. No one except that stray and a nosy old woman. Meanwhile, Emma sat in her usual basement corner, legs crossed, staring at the vent grate like it was a star in the dark. In her hands, she held a scrap of paper she'd found among the food scraps. She couldn't read, but she folded and unfolded it, as if it held a secret meaning. It was her way of calming her nerves. She felt something was coming. She didn't know if it was good or bad. Scout returned just before dusk. The cold, the damp, his aching leg, none of it stopped him. He crawled under the fence, silent, and settled in front of the grate. When Emma saw him, she didn't move right away. She stared, as if needing to be sure he wasn't a dream. Then she crawled slowly until they were face to face, separated by rusty bars and a world of misunderstanding. He wagged his tail slightly, a subtle gesture. No excitement. She raised her hand and pressed it to the metal. Her fingers trembled. Scout softly licked the air. No physical touch, but the message was clear. "I'm here." That was enough. Emma didn't need words. She felt the language of the soul. Then Scout did something unexpected. He turned and started digging the dirt right in front of the grate. Emma watched, eyes wide. He dug with force, with urgency, as if he knew time was short. When he finished, he stepped back and looked toward the woods. She understood. The next day, Susan woke uneasy. A weight on her chest had kept her up all night. Something was calling her. She decided to return to the estate. This time, she didn't go alone. She brought Jessica Carter, a social worker she'd met at church years ago. Jessica was young, determined, and had a knack for kids with special needs. When Susan told her what she'd seen, Jessica didn't hesitate. She prepared a file with Emma's case details, and they headed to the property. Before they got there, something stopped them. A bark. Scout was waiting at the edge of the woods. When he saw them, he ran to the back of the estate and stopped at the hole he'd dug the night before. He barked again, louder, looking straight at Jessica. Then he lowered his nose to the ground, pointing. Jessica knelt and studied the rusty grate. She listened. Silence. Then a whisper, a faint sound, breathing, human breathing, and then a soft tap, then another. Emma was there. Jessica stood quickly. Her face paled. "She's alive." "Someone's down there," she said, voice shaking, looking at Susan. Scout sat in front of them, eyes fixed on the hole. He didn't bark again. He just waited. The news spread fast through the quiet halls of the town hall. Jessica didn't waste time. As soon as she got back to Willow Creek, she went straight to the sheriff's office. She'd worked with many officers before, but she knew Tom Reynolds was different. Thorough, skeptical, and stuck to the rules. He wasn't one to act on feelings or hunches, but when Jessica laid Emma's case file on his desk, his face shifted. "You're telling me Charles has kept that girl locked in his house for months?" Tom asked, squinting with doubt. "I'm not saying it, Tom. The evidence is. The dog found her, we heard her breathing. And there are big gaps in the earlier reports," Jessica replied firmly. The sheriff sighed, leaned back in his chair, and looked out the window. He'd known Charles for years. They'd played golf at charity events. He'd seen him donate thousands to community causes, but something in Jessica's eyes told him she wasn't exaggerating. "We'll need a warrant to go in. With a guy like him, we'd better have everything in order," he muttered, pulling out an official form. Meanwhile, Scout stayed by the grate. He hadn't moved a muscle since Jessica left. His gaze held an ancient patience, as if time worked differently for him. Emma, inside, waited too. She no longer drew on the floor. She no longer curled up in fear. Now she sat near the grate, eyes fixed, as if trying to soak up every bit of the world beyond that hole. That night, Charles didn't go to the basement. He felt things slipping out of control. He'd seen Susan snooping again, this time with someone else. He'd noticed dirt tracks near the back entrance. The dog wasn't just a nuisance, it was a threat. Something had to be done, something final. He dialed an old number on his phone, one he hadn't used in years. A gruff voice answered. Charles spoke calmly in code. He said he had a household issue that needed discreet handling. They agreed to meet the next day, far from town. That same night, Jessica visited a local judge, Margaret Hayes, a strong-willed woman with eyes that missed nothing. Margaret had been a teacher before becoming a judge, and as she read the report, her face hardened. "If that girl is alive down there, I'm not waiting another minute," she said, signing the warrant with resolve. The next morning at dawn, Jessica, Tom, and 2 other officers headed to the estate. Scout was waiting. He stood at the front of the path, and when he saw the patrol cars, he wagged his tail once. No more words needed. He ran to the back and led them as if born for it. Tom examined the disturbed dirt, knelt and listened. Taps. Clear. Steady. Jessica covered her mouth. Moved. The girl was there. She still had strength to respond. "We're going in," Tom said, pulling out his flashlight. Charles wasn't home. He'd left early, according to the maid who answered the door. The officers searched every corner until they found the basement entrance. The door was locked, but it didn't hold against the force of the 2 deputies. The smell of dampness and confinement hit hard. And then they saw her, Emma, sitting on the floor, back straight, eyes wide. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just looked at them. And when Jessica knelt beside her, the girl did something no one expected. She reached out, without hesitation, and gently touched the sleeve of Jessica's coat. It was her way of saying, "Thank you." The news spread like wildfire. By noon, the story of a girl rescued from a basement in Willow Creek was the talk of every corner of town. At the community center, the bakery, even the church whispers, grew into an unstoppable wave. Charles Harrington's public image began to crumble before he even knew it. In the county hospital's emergency room, Emma was carefully examined. Jessica stayed by her side, holding her hand gently, saying little. Emma didn't speak. She didn't ask questions, but she didn't pull away either. She let them touch her, check her, as if she understood for the first time that they were caring for her, not controlling her. A kind-faced pediatrician, Dr. Rachel Morgan, checked Emma's vitals. Her diagnosis was clear: mild malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency from lack of sunlight, and deep sensory issues from being locked away so long. But amazingly, she was stable and alive. Jessica stepped into the hallway, eyes glossy. There, Scout waited, lying by the door, as if he knew he still had to protect her in this new place. When Jessica knelt to pet his head, he tilted his ears slightly, relaxed, calm. He'd done his job. "You're more than a hero," Jessica whispered tenderly. At that moment, Tom appeared, face grim. He held his phone, brow furrowed. "Charles is gone. Left town early this morning and turned off his phone. We've alerted state police and issued a search warrant," he said quietly. Jessica nodded. It didn't surprise her, but now wasn't the time to focus on his escape. The important thing was safe. In the waiting room, Susan spoke to a local reporter. Her voice was firm but emotional. She explained how she'd met Scout, how she'd felt something was wrong for days, how the dog had led her to Emma. The reporter, stunned, scribbled non-stop. The story wasn't just about a girl in danger. It was about a stray dog that broke through everyone's silence. That afternoon, TV crews arrived, news vans with satellite dishes parked outside the hospital. Some neighbors cried when they heard. Others, ashamed, wondered how they hadn't noticed sooner. Inside, Emma looked out the room's window, clutching a new teddy bear Jessica had given her. She didn't understand the commotion or the camera flashes, but something inside felt different. The air was lighter, as if the walls that had trapped her were gone. At the door, Scout stayed put. Every time someone new entered, he sized them up. Only when he recognized familiar faces did he lie back down, calm. That night, Jessica sat by Emma's bed. She didn't say much. She turned on a soft lamp and opened a picture book. She read quietly. Emma didn't react at first, but when Jessica reached a part where the character found a lost friend, Emma turned her head. She looked at Scout, then at Jessica, and without warning, she reached out and touched the picture of a dog in the book with one finger. It was the first time she showed interest in something outside herself. Jessica smiled, holding back tears. "We're going to be okay, Emma. You're safe now," she whispered. The first hearing took place a week after the rescue. In the small county courthouse, the benches were filled with familiar faces from Willow Creek, their expressions tense and restrained. Some came out of curiosity, others out of real anger, and a few, like Susan and Jessica, carried a mix of sadness and determination in their eyes. Charles Harrington had been caught in the next state, trying to cross into Canada under a false name. The philanthropist's disguise fell apart as fast as his pressed suits. Now handcuffed and haggard, he barely looked up. The charges were clear and heavy: unlawful confinement, psychological abuse, falsifying documents, and obstructing justice. The prosecution presented medical reports, Jessica's and Susan's testimonies, and patrol footage from the rescue's first moments. The judge, a stern-voiced man named Robert Collins, listened to every detail without interrupting. "This isn't just about breaking the law," he said at the end of the preliminary session. "It's about humanity. And what you did, Mr. Harrington, was deny a child her most basic right, to be seen." Alongside the legal process, Emma began a new chapter under Susan's temporary care, with therapy and support from the county's Child Development Center. Jessica, though not family, was named temporary legal guardian because of her emotional bond with Emma and her training in child psychology. Emma still didn't speak, but her gestures grew more expressive. In Susan's house, she moved freely through the garden, watching flowers, insects, the sky. Sometimes she sat under the big oak tree, and there Scout found her, always close, always watchful. He was her bright shadow. No one trained him for it, but he knew exactly where to be. One afternoon, Jessica arrived with a box. Inside were papers, crayons, clay, and colorful books with thick pages. Emma opened it curiously. She didn't react right away, but that night, as the sky turned orange, Susan found her drawing. The lines weren't clear, but they were steady. A brown line, a round shape, something like a drooping ear. It was Scout. In therapy, Emma started doing something new, responding to stimuli with gestures, mimicking sounds with her tongue, following movements with her eyes. It was small, yes, but enough. The experts agreed. The bond she'd formed with Scout was an anchor, a bridge. He hadn't just saved her body, he'd touched something many thought unreachable. Meanwhile, Charles sat in a cold cell. No visitors, no lawyers willing to stick with him. His face no longer graced business magazines or charity stories. He'd gone from admired to a symbol of hypocrisy. He spoke to no one. Tell me in the comments. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. And maybe, for the first time, he understood the silence he'd forced on others. One morning, as Emma walked barefoot on the dewy grass in the garden, Jessica watched from the door. Scout followed close behind, alert but calm. Suddenly, Emma stopped, knelt and picked up a fallen leaf. She held it to her face, studying it like a treasure. Then she turned and looked at Jessica. "Leaf," she said softly, barely audible, but clear. Jessica covered her mouth. She couldn't hold back tears, not for the word, but for what it meant. Emma was coming back. Winter faded slowly, leaving behind melting ice on the sidewalks and the fresh scent of wet earth. In Susan's house, the first flower buds began to peek timidly from the soil she'd tended for years, but now each plant seemed to grow differently, as if it knew something new and pure was there. Hope. Emma, in a light blue coat Jessica had given her, walked each morning along the stone path to the oak tree. Her steps were steadier, her gaze brighter. She didn't speak fluently yet, but words sprouted like small seeds finding fertile ground. Not many, not every day, but enough to know the world that once felt distant now belonged to her a little more. Scout followed her every step, no longer just a guardian, but a friend. He'd stopped watching for danger and started sharing moments. He lay beside her when she drew, watched from afar when she neared the pond, and walked her to the door when night fell. One afternoon, Jessica came with news. She knelt in front of Emma and explained gently that a couple from a nearby state, experienced with kids with autism, wanted to welcome her into their family. It wasn't a rushed decision. Emma could choose, take her time. Jessica didn't want her to feel abandoned, but to see it as a chance. Emma looked at her closely. She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She stood, walked to Scout, and knelt to hug him. Then, without looking back, she grabbed her sketchbook and showed it to Jessica. On one page were two figures, a small girl with blonde hair and a dog with drooping ears. In front of them, a farmhouse, and above, a clear sky. It was her way of saying, "I'm ready." Days later, in a quiet ceremony organized by the community, Scout was honored. The town's mayor, Linda Mitchell, a poised woman, gave him a symbolic medal in front of dozens of neighbors gathered in the square. Scout didn't understand the applause or cameras, but when he felt Emma's arms around his neck, he stayed still, calm, as if he knew that was his place. "There are heroes in uniforms," the mayor said in her short speech, "and others who walk silently, on four paws with a heart bigger than the world." Afterward, Susan approached Jessica. Her eyes were misty, but her face was calm. "I never thought I'd see something like this," she said quietly. "This girl, she changed us all." Jessica nodded. She didn't speak. She looked at Emma, who was playing with a fallen leaf, twirling it in the air, while Scout watched silently. Days later, the adoptive couple arrived. Paul and Sarah Bennett were warm, patient, with kind faces and unforced smiles. They introduced themselves respectfully, not pushing. Emma studied them for a long moment, then stood and offered them one of her drawings. It was her way of saying, "I accept you." The day she left was grey, but not sad. Susan baked homemade cookies. Jessica packed Emma's favorite books, and Scout sat by the suitcase, silent. When the car door opened, Emma turned, ran to him, and hugged him tightly. Then she placed a drawing between his paws, the same one she'd shown before, but now with a new detail, a golden star above the house. "Angel," she said quietly, with a faint smile. The car drove off down the dirt road, leaving a soft trail of dust. Scout stayed there, watching until it was gone. He didn't chase it. He didn't whine. He just sat, like angels do when their work on earth is done. 2 years passed. Willow Creek was never the same after a girl was freed from a basement by a stray dog. The Emma Thompson case filled news reports for weeks, sparking debates, new laws, and even a foundation in her name, dedicated to protecting vulnerable kids with disabilities. Jessica Carter was invited to speak at universities, and Susan Miller received a state award for civic courage. Charles Harrington was sentenced to 27 years in prison. At the final hearing, he never spoke a word of remorse. His face stayed blank, like a shadow refusing to fade. No one visited him. No letters. No big-name lawyers. His wealth vanished in lawsuits, back taxes, and legal fees. Emma was officially adopted by Paul and Sarah Bennett, a couple from New Hampshire, who turned part of their home into a sensory stimulation room. There, Emma continued therapy, attended an inclusive school, and over time learned to enjoy language. She didn't speak fluently, but she spoke, and most importantly, she made herself understood. She never forgot Scout. The dog stayed in Willow Creek under Susan's loving care. He had his spot in the garden, a bed by the stove, and the constant affection of neighbors. Every spring, they took him to the Emma Thompson Foundation, where kids knew him as the dog who heard a girl's soul. He didn't like crowds, but he sat calmly, letting them pet him gently. He was patient, serene, as if he knew that was part of his purpose too. One day, Emma came back. She was 10 now, her hair longer, her eyes bright with light. She stepped out of the car with her sketchbook in hand. She walked through Susan's garden, now full of tulips, and found Scout lying under the shade of the old oak. He lifted his head slowly, and before his eyes fully opened, he knew her by her scent. He knew who she was. She sat beside him. She didn't speak for a few minutes. Then she opened her sketchbook and flipped to the last page. It was a new drawing, Emma and Scout under that same oak, with a sky full of golden stars above. "Thank you," she whispered. Scout closed his eyes, calm, and there they stayed. Two souls who didn't need words to understand each other. From the garden's entrance, Jessica watched from afar. She knew this moment wasn't hers. It was theirs. And she smiled, certain that the world isn't always fair, but sometimes when all seems lost, love finds a way in. Because as the bronze plaque at the Emma Thompson Foundation's entrance reads, "Even if the world abandons you, a noble soul can find you." And sometimes that soul has four paws, Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.